The first Muslims changed the world before most Islamic rules were even revealed. Today we'll begin with something that's very familiar to all of you. But the intention of it is to move from something familiar to something that's not as familiar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Quran to this world over a course of 23 years. And the majority of the surahs that were revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were revealed to him in Makkah. So 23 years of the Quran was given to him in Makkah. And the last 1/3 of the Quran was given to the Prophet in Medina. Now in Makkah, the message of Islam looked very different practically than the message of Islam in Medina. The message of Islam in Mecca did not have anything to do, for the most part, it did not have to do with details about how to slaughter an animal. It had nothing to do with performing Hajj. It had nothing to do with fasting in Ramadan. It had nothing to do with clothing guidelines. It had nothing to do with inheritance laws. So many of the things that you think when someone is Muslim and someone's Islamic and someone is observing their religion, none of those things were there for 13 years in Makkah. So if you were a Muslim or you accepted Islam in Makkah and then you died before Hijrah happened and the only Islam you knew was the Islam of Makkah, then your Islam would look very different than the Islam that we see in front of us today. Another important thing that Allah gave the message of the Quran unified by surahs. So is a message. These are all packaged messages from Allah. Allah calls them right. The Prophet is told to say these are messages of my master. Right? And a message is a complete unit. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And it's one full concept, a full idea. Right? Now I want you to use your imagination and I want you to analyze this with me. Let's take the example of, say, Surah Al-Man. And I recited some ayat of Rahman to you in the beginning. It's a relatively longer Makki surah. It's not very small. And it deals with many subjects. It talks about the favors of Allah. It talks about Judgment Day. It talks about a description of Jannam. It talks about the 2 different pairs of gardens in Jannah. So it's got many subjects. But if you ask practically, so Allah described people of Jannam and Allah described people of Jannah. But in this message, what does He want from people? If somebody only heard, that's the only Islam. It's very possible, by the way, if you lived in Makkah, that you didn't hear the whole Quran. You only heard some of it. Yeah, like for example, the jinn only heard a little bit of Quran and then they reacted. That's an also inna, right? So if you only heard man then, you would say, okay, some people are going to be in trouble on Judgment Day, and some people are going to be whoever was afraid that they're going to stand in front of, there's going to be a trial. Whoever is afraid of that trial is going to get 2 gardens. That's the message of, but okay, fine, I'm afraid. What do you want me to do? What do you need me to do practically? What do I need to change? The only message of changing is don't be corrupt when it comes to the scale. Don't be corrupt in the scale. Establish the scale with justice and don't shortchange in the scale. What is simply if somebody heard you know what they would think? They would think, okay, if I sell rice and I'm going to put the weight on one side and rice on the other, if I just cheat just a little bit, give my customer maybe 5% less, nobody will notice. Right? But Masan is a broader concept. I owe money to someone that's part of Masan. I better pay it back. I did something wrong I damaged somebody's property. I have to pay repairs or I have to undo the damage. This is also part of Misan. There's a crime that's happened. Justice has to be served. That's also Misan. Every court system in the world, they have a scale as their symbol because Misan means justice to balance things out. And to 100 different people listening to this, they have to think about where the Misan is messed up in their life. Right? It's not everybody has the same problem. Not everybody has to weigh the same things. So everybody has to figure out their own Misan. But Allah did not give specific instructions about when you are running a business, do this. And when you are in government, do this. And when you are a student, do this. And when you are an employee, do that. He didn't. He just said what was the Quran telling people 23 of the time, 13 years. And the people who followed that, you know what Allah called them. He called them. Those are the first people. They are the ones that are the closest to Allah. They're the closest ones to Allah. Now imagine Allah is talking about men and women that are the closest to Allah, and they still, for the most of that time, they still don't fast in Ramadan. They've never gone to Hajj. They're not even thinking about Hajj. They haven't observed majority of the dietary laws. In fact, they're not even, alcohol is not haram for them yet. That's later. Even alcohol is not haram for them. And they're being called what? What is so special about them nowadays? I live in America. There are people who live in Europe. Other places where Muslims are a minority. When they see somebody praying, they go crazy. When they see a woman in hijab, they go crazy. They start getting offended. The problem is in Makkah, what did you see that made you crazy? You didn't see a woman in hijab. You didn't see someone making salah in the street. You didn't see that. You didn't say, oh, I hate these people with a beard. Everybody had a beard in Makkah. You didn't see everybody, oh, this guy's wearing a turban, and Abu Jahal was wearing a turban, and this guy's speaking Arabic. Everybody was speaking Arabic, right? If one of you went back in a time machine, went back to Mecca, and you didn't know any Arabic, and you were sitting next to Abu Jahal, you think this is a sheikh? You wouldn't know cuz he's dressed in Arab clothes and he's speaking beautiful Arabic. And my point is, we know that the Quraysh hated Islam so much so that they were ready to kill the Prophet sallallahu wasallam. They were ready to torture the Sahaba over what? What was so revolutionary? What was so problematic? Misan. It was a sense of justice. That's what brought Mecca to its knees. The Quraysh to their knees. This is what they could not tolerate. They couldn't tolerate it. Now the thing is, this is not a rule. It's basically a principle. And a principle means that if you're a doctor, the principle applies to you. If you're a son, the principle applies to you. If you're a father, the principle applies to you. Yeah. The principle applies to everyone. The thing about a hukum, a rule like fasting, the fasting applies to someone who is healthy. Fasting applies to someone who is old enough. There are rules, right? Inheritance applies in one situation, does not apply in another situation. There are rules. Hajj is mandatory in some situations. It's not a mandatory in other situations. But principles are always applicable. There's not sometimes they're applicable, sometimes they're not applicable. They're always applicable. And you have, instead of looking for a fatwa, you and I, the human beings, not even believers, human beings were being told by the early Quran, you have the ability to figure out how to apply the principle of misan in your life. I don't have to give you the details. They should think for themselves. Figure it out yourself. This was the early message of Islam. This was the foundation of Islam. Now fast forward, we come to Medina. Allah gave us the technicalities of Urdu. For example, He gave us the technicalities of inheritance law. He gave us detailed instructions about divorce law. He gave us, the rules for fighting in the path of Allah. The rules for zakat. The rules. Things became very specific, so specific that in the history of Islam, the most elaborate subject is why, because it's a technical understanding of the rules, that even more than what are they just technical understanding, which is very different from the principles. What I'm trying to tell you is those 13 years were not technical, but now things are becoming more and more technical. And of course, now you have to observe the rules because the rules have been revealed. So, I'm going to fast forward. We're going to go to almost the end of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he's giving his final speech, and there are a few statements like, the one who is here should tell someone who is not here, and he said, communicate even if it's one. Ayah, communicate even if it's one now. Let's think about that. There are some people on that day when he was giving that speech, Prophet Muhammad. There were some people that have been learning Islam from him from the beginning. Abu Bakr Sadiq is sitting there. There are Sahaba that have been with him almost the whole time. Then there are the majority of the people, huge numbers of people that I will call them the 99%. 99% of the people in that gathering are not trained for many years by the Prophet Muhammad. Some of them are Muslim for 1 week. Some of them are Muslim for 1 month. Some of them are Muslim for 24 hours. That's the majority. That's the majority of the crowd that is in front of the Prophet Muhammad in his last speech. The minority is the close Sahaba. The majority are basically new Muslims fresh. What is he telling them? Go give, even if it's what? 1 ayah. How are they going to give? They're only Muslim for a week. They're only Muslim for 24 hours. They haven't been learning the Prophet's teachings for so many years. And it's not a long speech. It's a very short speech. Right? There are different narrations of it. It's a short speech. And when that speech is over, they're all going to go, and this is the message that they heard. You know what this is? This is the cycle starting again. Meaning those people will go and they will share very little of the Quran. But that little of the Quran it won't necessarily have the rules, but it will have the principles. Because there's no page of the Quran without principles. There are many pages of the Quran without rules, but there's no ayah of the Quran without principles. Principles will spread. Principles will spread because the principles are the foundation and the rules are the building that sits on top of that foundation. What did Allah tell us about Bani is? They became obsessed with the rules. And they had no respect for the principles, no respect for the values, no respect for misan. This was the foundational message. And then when those people learn the principles, then of course eventually they will learn the rules and then they will apply the rules properly. What did you know, just like in construction, what's the more important thing, the building or the foundation? The foundation. Then you can't build a building if you don't build the foundation. And if you haven't been taking care of the foundation, and the foundation keeps getting weaker and weaker, and you keep doing a new paint job on the building, and you keep adding new windows and adding new doors, the whole thing is going to collapse. You're going to keep if the wall keeps having a crack, and you fix it, and it has a crack again, and I fix it has a crack. The problem isn't in the wall. The problem is in the foundation. Our deen was giving us a message about the importance of reinforcing the foundation with, that means there were Sahaba that were very mature. They understand all of they're like right there are Sahaba that can do of the Quran. There are those Sahaba and then there are those Sahaba who are 1 month Muslim, baby Muslims, right? And each one of them has their own responsibility. The one that's starting out, they have a journey to take. The one that's ahead, they have a journey to take. But one thing they all have in common is the principles. That's actually what they have in common. The reason I think this is so important to share is because you get two extremes among Muslims today. You get Muslims that are obsessed with the rules and they basically and you'll find that they don't really live by principles, but they live by the rules, like the technicalities of the beard very, very well. Understood the difference of opinion among the Fawqa on how long the beard should be, on how high the pants should be, and what kind of haircut is allowed, what kind of haircut is not allowed, what did Malik say, what Imam said, what if, etc. Discuss that to ends of the earth, the technical details, no regard for what the and. You can see it. You can see there's no regard for the principles. And then there's the extreme opposite reaction. The extreme opposite reaction is Islam is just principles. These rules are useless. So long as you're following the principles, good job, right? The rules are these people, they're so obsessed with the rules. Look at them. They don't follow any principles. So what happens is the people of principles say we don't need the rules. And the people of rules say we don't need the principles. The Quran gave us the principles. And on top of them built the rules. It's not enough to build a foundation. What's the point of a foundation if you don't have a building? You have to have the rules. But you can't have the rules without the foundation. This is a whole picture. So when someone hears me talk about this immediately, the mind is much more intelligent than the comment section in a social media post. If this was a social media post, immediately are you saying Sharia is not important? Are you saying we don't have to follow the rules? Liberal, right? Progressive. This is the mind. Why? Because you have to be on this team or you have to be on that team. And you know what gets ignored when we do that? Quran gets ignored. The Quran itself gets ignored. There are some people who are starting their journey right now. They don't need the rules. Right now they need the principles. There are people that are already very familiar with the rules. Their very family even, they need a reinforcement of bringing back the principles onto the rules, because you can end up just with rules and no principles behind them, no life behind them. Right? This is an extremely important discussion also for the next generation. There are lots of youth that say, I don't know. Islam, I don't know about these rules, man. There's everything's haram. These guys make life difficult. Everything's just, rules. My problem with Islam is the rules. Why do they have these rules for women? Why do they have these rules for, zakat? Why do you have these rules for prayer? Why do you have to have these rules for food? Why do you have these rules for alcohol, etc.? I don't like these rules. I want to be free. You know what? Good. You should have a problem with the rules. You should, because even said in the Quran, if she said the first thing, if the first thing that came in the Quran was don't drink alcohol, then we would have said we will never leave alcohol. Don't give me the rules first, because the rules are not convincing. You know what's convincing? The principles are convincing. When you are convinced of the principles, then nobody has to convince you of the rules. No one has to convince you of the rules. The conversation about Islam with those who are loose in their Islam. Those who are not sure about their Islam, those who are walking away from Islam, the conversation with them doesn't need to be about the rules. The conversation with them needs to be about the principles. And you know what? Every time you talk to them about the principles and it touches them, they say, oh, what about the rules? I don't like that rule. Let's talk about the rule instead. Cause they get, when a person gets cornered and they find a way to escape the conversation. But any one of you, especially the youth that are engaged in dawah, friends that talk about the rules, friends that say this rule doesn't make sense, and you fall into that conversation and start defending the rule this way or that way or the other way. The hikmah of the rules will be understood by those who respect the rules. If you don't respect the rules, doesn't matter how much you explain the logic of them and the explanation of them, and it won't make a difference. Because you're trying to build this building with no foundation. This is why the early Quran has to be understood first, properly. How do you communicate the principles of this religion? How do you communicate them? And once we are effectively able to do that, I am telling you, even if the people are they know very little about the rules they are on a journey of obeying Allah that Allah wanted for them in His last speech, did not give them a detailed explanation of the rules. He gave them some fundamental principles, because that's the starting point. We have to come back to the starting point. May Allah make us a generation that helps our fellow brothers and sisters and even non-Muslims come back to that foundation on which this beautiful religion is built. Muhammad, about Allah, revive the foundation and the structure will stand strong again. Ameen.